Hello everyone. Welcome to Dead Time Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's story. Elise had never seen the house before, yet as her car crested the final bend of the narrowing gravel road, her breath caught with strange recognition. The house stood still, timeless, at the end of the winding path like it had always been there, waiting. Not forgotten. Not abandoned. Just waiting. It wasn't on her GPS. It hadn't been on any map. The last town she passed, Oak Bend, was 30 miles behind her, and the road since then had become steadily less paved, less lit, and less traveled. Her cousin in Mirth hadn't answered her last few texts. Her phone had died soon after the last signal bar vanished. Now it sat useless in her passenger seat. Thunder grumbled in the distance. Storm clouds rolled over the hills like bruises in the sky. The house was tall, Victorian in structure, but hunched, like it had curled in on itself over the years. The wood siding had gone gray and curling with rot in some places, yet the windows were intact. One of them, on the second floor, flickered with light. Her dashboard chimed, low fuel. She sighed and looked up again. A single porch light clicked on. She should have left. Her fingers even hovered over the gearshift. But her eyes wouldn't let go of the porch, the light, the way it reached out to her. As if someone inside had been watching. As if they had been waiting for her in particular. And as her headlights dimmed and the rain began its quiet pattering on the roof of her car, Elise found herself stepping out. The wind smelled like wet leaves and stone. Pine needles crunched beneath her boots. The front yard was nothing but overgrown grass, patches of wild moss, and a half-buried bird bath filled with stagnant water. She approached the porch slowly, arms crossed against the cold. The swing creaked slightly, nudged by the breeze. The front door stood closed. She raised her hand to knock. But before she could touch it, the knob turned with a soft clack. The door creaked inward, revealing only shadows beyond. And a voice, soft and quiet, as though spoken directly beside her ear, said, "Elise." She froze. No one was there. Then, from deep within the house, a second voice. Older. Drier. "Come in, dear. You're just in time." Elise stood in the doorway, caught between the weight of rain behind her and the breathless hush of the house in front of her. The door had opened wide now, as though whatever lay inside had peeled back its skin to offer shelter. Warmth rolled out gently, not inviting exactly, more like exhaling. She should have run. Every survival instinct scratched at the back of her mind. But she was cold, her phone was dead, her tank nearly empty, and the nearest gas station was likely miles behind her. Besides that voice, it knew her name. She stepped across the threshold. The door whispered shut behind her. The change was immediate. The outside world disappeared in a hush of wood and silence. The air smelled of lavender and old books, like the kind of bed and breakfast where everything is slightly out of date but deeply curated. A hallway stretched before her, long and narrow, wallpapered in faded gold filigree. Wall sconces cast amber halos onto polished wood floors. There was no dust, no smell of mildew or rot. In fact, the house smelled fresh, as if someone had lit a candle only minutes before. To her right, a wide parlor opened up. A fire crackled low in the hearth. Above it, an oiled portrait of a young girl with a pale face and expressionless eyes watched the room. Elise noticed the teacup first. Set precisely on a small table beside a velvet armchair. Steam still curled lazily from the lip. Someone had been here. Recently. "Elise," the voice repeated. Closer now. Feminine. She spun toward the sound. Nothing. only the hallway and its flickering sconces. Hello? She called, voice soft in the hush. My car ran out of gas. I didn't mean to. Of course, the voice said gently. That's how they all find it. Elise froze. Find what? The house gave no answer. Only the wind outside, now barely audible behind thick walls. Her heart tapped nervously in her chest. She took a few hesitant steps toward the parlor. The carpet felt soft underfoot, too plush for a house that looked so old. On the far wall stood a grandfather clock, tall, dark, and unmoving. Its face was blank. No hands. No numbers. Just a faint, gold-etched ring where time should be. Then, from down the hallway, she heard footsteps. Not hurried. Not heavy. Just casual. Like someone walking through their home. Elise, the voice came again, drifting from the shadows beyond the parlor. You've arrived. Come in, dear. It's time to choose your room. The footsteps drew closer, each one a gentle thud on hardwood, measured and unhurried. Elise instinctively stepped backward, brushing against the doorframe of the parlor. Her eyes scanned the hallway for movement, but it wasn't dark. The sconces glowed warm gold. Nothing hid in shadows because there weren't any. Still, she couldn't see who was approaching. Then, the figure emerged. An older woman, tall and elegant, stepped from the far end of the corridor. Her posture was impossibly straight, arms folded loosely at her front. She wore a floor-length black dress that shimmered subtly with age. A crisp white collar framed her thin neck. Her skin was pale, like flour, and her dark gray hair was wound tightly into a braided bun. She stopped about 10 feet from Elise, her eyes settling on her with the ease of someone who'd already known exactly where she'd be. You're right on time, she said. Her voice was honey-smooth and old, like it had spent years echoing through hallways. The storm's about to begin. Best get you settled. Elise swallowed. Who are you? The woman smiled thinly. I'm the housekeeper. You may call me Agnes. Is this an inn? Agnes tilted her head. Not precisely. I didn't book a room. No, Agnes said gently. You didn't. Elise felt her chest tighten slightly. I think I should go. I must have made a wrong turn. My cousin. No one finds this house unless they're meant to. Agnes interrupted, her eyes kind but firm. We don't advertise. We don't appear on GPS. But we always have a room prepared. Especially for guests like you. Like me? Agnes stepped closer, her gaze unblinking. The lost ones. The ones looking for something they can't name. I'm not lost. Agnes offered a small, dry chuckle. Of course not, dear. But come along. It's best to choose quickly. Choose what? Your room. Elise hesitated. The air felt thicker suddenly, like the house had leaned in closer. I'm not staying. I just need to use a phone. Maybe wait out the storm. There are no phones here, Agnes said. Only the rooms. Before Elise could argue, Agnes turned and began walking back down the hallway, her steps silent despite the wooden floor. After a moment's pause, Elise followed. As she walked deeper into the house, the air changed. Not colder, just older. Like each breath passed through years before reaching her lungs. Portraits lined the walls, none labeled. All eyes followed her. And then, at the end of the hallway, Agnes stopped in front of a pale green door. Etched into the surface, in delicate cursive. The guest room. Agnes rested one hand on the door's brass knob, but didn't open it. This is where most guests stay, she said. But you don't have to choose it. Elise stared at the words carved into the wood, the guest room. The cursive was shallow and elegant, not scratched or forced, lovingly done, almost ceremonial. What do you mean, choose? Elise asked quietly. There are other rooms, Agnes replied. But each one holds a memory, a truth. Once you sleep there, you must live with what you learn. The words hung in the air between them, unsettling in their certainty. I just need a phone, Elise said. Or a way to call someone. Anyone. Agnes' eyes softened, and for the first time, Elise saw something more human behind them. Tiredness. Maybe even sympathy. Dear girl, she said gently. You've already called. That's how you found the house. The hallway creaked softly behind them. Elise turned. No one was there. But the air was different now, thick with hush, like the house itself was listening. Is there anyone else here? She asked. Of course. The house is never empty. Agnes' voice was serene. Though most guests remain in their rooms. It's not polite to disturb others while they're reflecting. Elise's mouth had gone dry. What happens if I stay? You rest, Agnes replied. You remember. And then, if you're strong enough, you leave. And if I don't stay? Agnes smiled faintly. Then the house waits a little longer. Elise looked at the door again. There was something oddly compelling about it, not because it was beautiful, but because it felt like it knew her. As if it held a part of her she hadn't even realized was missing. She reached for the doorknob. It was warm. The door clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, the room was dim but cozy. Pale green wallpaper. A four-poster bed with white lace draping. A small writing desk. A single suitcase on the floor. Her suitcase. Elise blinked. That wasn't in my car. Agnes didn't answer. She simply stood at the threshold, hands folded. On the desk sat a leather-bound guest ledger. A fountain pen rested neatly beside it. The open page had a single line written in neat, looping script. Welcome, Elise. Please sign. Elise stepped slowly into the room, her boots barely making a sound on the polished floorboards. The moment she crossed the threshold, the air shifted, thicker, quieter. The kind of silence that made your ears hum. She glanced behind her. Agnes hadn't followed. The hallway was empty again. The door clicked shut without anyone touching it. Elise turned back to the desk. The leather guest ledger looked aged but cared for. No dust, no cracks in the binding. Its cover had a faint floral embossing, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right. She approached and read the inscription on the open page again. Welcome, Elise. Please sign. The pen gleamed in the amber light. It wasn't plastic but metal, heavy-looking, with a gold nib and a dark green barrel that matched the room's wallpaper. She touched it hesitantly. It was cold. The guest book's pages fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze. Elise felt a chill move across her scalp, down her spine. She looked at the page again, and realized suddenly that there were names above hers. Not just one or two. Dozens. She flipped backward through the pages, each one filled with neat handwriting in ink that ranged from black to brown to faded gray. Some names were elegant, some childlike, others shaky, as if the hand that wrote them trembled. She stopped at one near the middle. Silas Darnell, 1912. Matilda Clay, 1913. Eleanor Finch, 1913. C. Randall Wexler, 1914. She flipped forward again, heart pounding, until she reached the most recent page. Her name was already written at the top in looping black ink, but she hadn't written it. Elise Beaumont. The ink still glistened slightly, as though freshly penned. She stepped back from the desk, heart thudding. There was a sound behind her, a soft rustle, like fabric shifting on a bed. She turned. The bedspread was smooth, untouched. But there was now something on the pillow. A small card, folded neatly in half. She approached and picked it up with trembling fingers. Inside, in the same careful handwriting. Rest, Elise. Your memory begins tonight. She stared at it, then looked around the room, voice shaking. Is this some kind of trick? But no one answered. And then, without fanfare, the fire in the little hearth sparked to life behind her. The room sighed softly. The bed, impossibly, looked warmer now. Inviting. Elise stood frozen, the folded card trembling slightly in her hand. The flames in the hearth crackled gently, casting orange patterns across the walls. The scent of burning cedar drifted into the air, familiar somehow, though she couldn't recall where she'd smelled it before. She placed the card back on the pillow and stepped away from the bed, her nerves crawling. The suitcase beside the dresser drew her eye again. It looked identical to hers. Same worn leather handle, same navy blue canvas, same faded airline tag from a trip she took last year to Portland. Her initials were scrawled in permanent marker on the side. But she hadn't brought it in. No one had. With caution, she knelt beside it and unzipped it slowly. Inside were her clothes, folded perfectly. Her favorite wool sweater, the one she thought she'd lost months ago. The necklace her ex had given her, tangled in a pair of socks. A journal she hadn't written in since college. Everything inside was familiar, and everything inside was gone from her apartment back home. She sat back on her heels, trying to calm her breath. "Okay," she whispered aloud. "Okay, maybe this is a dream. A weird one. Or maybe someone went through my stuff somehow. Maybe my cousin set this up. She did always like spooky nonsense." Even as she said it, the excuse felt thin, like paper stretched over a hole too wide to cover. The fire popped softly. She stood again and glanced at the window. Outside, the trees were still. But behind the glass was not the dark she expected, it was gray. Not moonlight, not dawn. A kind of in-between light, dull and sourceless, like time had stopped. She touched the window pane. It was warm. A knock echoed through the room. Elise jumped and spun. The door. She crept to it and placed her hand on the knob. Paused. Another knock. Slower this time. Heavier. "Hello?" she called through the wood. Silence. Then, barely audible, came a voice. Not Agnes. Younger. Male. "Don't sleep," it said. "If you sleep, you'll forget." Elisa's hand shot back from the knob. A moment later, the hallway outside fell silent again. She stood there a long time, heart pounding, staring at the door. Then slowly, cautiously, she locked it. The fire hissed behind her. Elise stood with her back pressed to the guest room door, her breath slow and shallow. The knock still echoed in her bones. That voice, "Don't sleep, you'll forget," clung to her nerves like static. It hadn't sounded threatening, exactly. It had sounded desperate. Pleading. She stared at the doorknob, now turned sideways and latched. She jiggled it just to be sure. Still locked. The fire whispered behind her. She turned and looked at the bed again. The room hadn't changed. Still tidy. Still warm. Still impossibly tailored to her tastes, down to the way the books on the shelf were alphabetized by author, like she used to do in her old bedroom. She sat on the edge of the mattress, not letting herself relax fully. The bed was soft, too soft. It gave beneath her like it was holding something just beneath the surface. She reached for the guest book on the desk again and flipped past her name to the blank pages beyond. Dozens of empty leaves. Then, at the very last page, faint lines of ink began to appear. She watched them form in real time. Don't trust her. There is no morning. Elise dropped the book and stumbled back. The ink gleamed like it had just been scrawled by an invisible hand. "Nope," she muttered. "Nope, nope." She grabbed her coat from the back of the chair and stormed toward the door. She yanked it open, only to stop short. The hallway wasn't there. Instead, the doorway opened into a wall. Not just any wall, the guest room wall. Same wallpaper, same sconces. As if the room now wrapped around itself like a closed loop. She stepped back, slammed the door shut, then opened it again. Same wall. No hallway. No Agnes. No house. Just her, and this room that had stopped obeying normal logic. Elise backed away until her calves hit the bed frame. "Okay," she whispered. "I'm dreaming. This is a dream. Sleep-deprived, stress-induced, psychotic episode, something. That's all." She closed her eyes and took a long, shaky breath. When she opened them again, the wall was still there. The knock didn't come again. But in the silence that followed, something else began, soft and subtle. A scratching. From inside the wall. The scratching was faint at first. Just the occasional scrape, like something small shifting behind the wallpaper. Too slow to be a mouse. Too deliberate to be the house settling. Elise held her breath, listening. It came again. Scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch. It was just beneath the floral pattern to the left of the fireplace, behind a framed painting of a weeping willow. She stepped toward it, her heart pounding hard enough to blur the sound. "Hello?" she asked, not even sure why. Silence. She hesitated, then reached out and lifted the edge of the painting. The sound stopped instantly. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. She stood still for several seconds before letting the painting fall back into place. Nothing moved. She exhaled shakily and sat at the desk, the firelight casting long shadows across the ledger. The book now lay open to her name again. The eerie message from before, "Don't trust her. There is no morning dot," had faded entirely, as if it had never existed. She leaned forward and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The flames crackled behind her. The silence didn't answer. She stayed there a while, eyes fixed on the blank page, until something new caught her attention. A faint humming, gentle, tuneless, like someone singing to themselves through a closed door. It was distant, muffled, but unmistakably female. Elise stood and approached the fireplace. The sound seemed to drift from the left wall, the same one where the scratching had come from. She placed her palm flat against the wallpaper. Warm. She pressed her ear to it. The humming grew clearer. A lullaby, maybe? Notes that rose and dipped like someone rocking in a chair. Then, a whisper, soft, sharp, too close. "Elise." She jerked back, heart hammering. The humming had stopped. But something moved behind the wall. Not a mouse. Not pipes. Footsteps. Measured. Deliberate. Pacing just behind the wallpaper, following the line of the wall. Elise backed away until she reached the edge of the bed. Her mind raced, trying to rationalize, explain, wake up. She grabbed the folded card from the pillow again. "Rest, Elise. Your memory begins tonight." She looked toward the fire, which suddenly burned lower, dimmer. The guest room no longer felt warm. It felt watched. Elise didn't sleep that night, not really. She lay in the bed with the covers pulled up to her chest, eyes open, watching the shifting glow of the fireplace. The air in the room had changed. It wasn't just still, it was alert. Listening. Breathing with her. At some point, the fire burned itself down to coals, though no smoke rose and the logs never blackened. No ash fell. Just. She was back in her old apartment. The one with the creaky stairs and leaky faucet. It was empty, dimly lit by the soft orange of a street lamp outside. Her suitcase was by the door, the same one now sitting in the guest room. She stood in the middle of the floor, barefoot, watching her reflection in the living room window. It moved when she didn't. "Elise," it whispered, "don't forget me." Her reflection lifted its hand and pointed behind her. She turned. The guest room door stood at the end of her hallway. It was open. Beyond it, blackness. The smell of lavender and old cedar. "Elise," the voice came again, this time from behind the door. "You were already here." You never left. She woke with a gasp, the sheets tangled around her legs. The room was exactly the same. Same painting. Same desk. Same unburned logs in the hearth. But the guest ledger had moved. It now sat open on the pillow beside her. The ink had changed. Page 248 was all it said, in the center of the open spread. No other markings. No signature. Just that. She sat up slowly and lifted the book. She flipped through it, page by page, counting. Page 248 was blank. At first. Then the ink began to bloom across the paper like a spreading bruise. It formed one word. Remember. The mirror above the dresser fogged slightly. Elise rose and crossed to it, drawn by something unspoken. Words had appeared in the mist. It wasn't your fault. She touched the glass. It was ice cold. Something was changing now. Not just the room. Her. She could feel pieces of herself stirring, half-forgotten thoughts, images that flickered like broken film reels. Rain. A man yelling. The sound of glass shattering. And blood. Somewhere there had been blood. The image vanished from the mirror as soon as Elise blinked. The mist receded like breath drawn back into unseen lungs, leaving only her pale reflection. She stared at herself for a long moment. Her cheeks looked hollow. Her eyes too dark, as though sleep had retreated permanently into some unreachable depth. She turned away, clutching the guest ledger tightly against her chest. It felt heavier now, thicker, as if it had grown pages overnight. She dropped it back on the desk, the sound louder than expected, too loud for a book that size. The fire in the hearth hissed suddenly, as if in response. A low groan came from beneath the floorboards. Elise stiffened. It wasn't the creak of old wood or the shifting of a foundation. This was closer, and lower, like a moan from something just below her feet. She knelt and pressed her palm against the floor. It vibrated slightly. A hum, subtle but present. Then she heard it, whispering. Not just one voice. Dozens. A chorus of hushed syllables overlapping, unintelligible, but unmistakably human. Like prayers spoken through cotton. She scrambled back, breath caught in her throat. Elise. The whisper this time wasn't beneath her. It was behind her. She turned. And saw the closet door had opened. Just a crack. It had been closed all night. She stood slowly. The air was denser now, the firelight dimmer. Shadows moved differently, longer, slower, like oil spreading across water. She reached for the closet doorknob. The moment her fingers touched it, the whispering stopped. Silence rushed in like a flood. She opened the door. Inside was nothing. No clothes. No hangers. No shelves. Just a narrow corridor that should not have been possible. Far too long, lined with the same floral wallpaper. It receded into darkness, no visible end. From far within it, a sound echoed. A single, distant sob. Then, "Don't forget me!" Elise's heart thundered. She stepped back, closed the closet door with trembling fingers, and turned the lock. Just in case. She leaned against it, breathing hard, trying to make sense of the mounting impossibilities. That's when the floor beneath her bed groaned again. She crouched and lifted the edge of the bed skirt. There was something under there. She wasn't alone. Elise hesitated. The fabric of the bed skirt clung to her fingers, like it didn't want to be moved. Her heart pounded in her chest, louder than the whispering had been. She crouched lower, slowly lifting the edge of the cover. Darkness met her. Not shadow. Not absence of light. Something heavier. She leaned in. For a moment, there was only the hardwood floor, stained slightly beneath the bed's center where dust should have gathered, but hadn't. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw it. A shape. Long. Still. too large to be anything ordinary. A bundle of something wrapped tightly in a faded floral quilt. The fabric was frayed at the corners, barely holding its form together. And it was breathing. A slow, shallow rise and fall. Elise nearly dropped the bed skirt. She crawled backward, breath caught in her throat. Her body screamed to run, to tear through the door and crash through a window if necessary, but her legs wouldn't move. She stared, frozen, as a hand, pale, slender, and unmistakably human, emerged from beneath the quilt. The fingers were curled loosely, knuckles bruised violet, nails too long. Then the hand twitched. "Elise!" The voice was thin, childlike. It came from under the bed. "Please, help me!" Elise's throat tightened. "Who are you?" No answer. Just the faint sound of breath. She reached, against her better judgment, for the flashlight on the desk. She flicked it on and shone the beam under the bed. Nothing. No bundle. No hand. Only bare wooden floorboards. She lowered the light and blinked. Had it vanished? Had she imagined it? But the air still carried the scent of something old and shut in. Faintly floral. Like that same quilt. She got to her feet and backed away from the bed. Her knees were weak, her hands trembling. That was when the closet door rattled violently behind her. She jumped and turned. The doorknob spun. Once. Twice. Then silence. From inside, something scraped down the length of the hidden corridor. Something being dragged. Elise stumbled toward the door and fumbled with the lock. But by the time she opened it again, the corridor was gone. The closet was just a closet. Empty. Perfectly still. As if it had never been anything more. Elise didn't sleep again. Not that night. Not with closets opening into endless hallways and hands reaching from beneath beds. Instead, she sat in the armchair by the fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring into the dying coals. The quiet had changed. It wasn't the peaceful hush of late night anymore. It was heavy. Charged. The walls felt too close, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Eventually, something strange happened. The light in the room began to shift, so slowly at first that she barely noticed. It wasn't dawn. There was no sunlight streaming through the window. But the color of the walls, the bedspread, the air itself, all began to take on a silver-gray hue. As if time had taken a step sideways, not forward. Then came the knock. But not at the door. It came from the mirror. 3 soft taps. Elise turned her head slowly, heart hammering. The surface of the mirror above the dresser had fogged again, though the fire had long since gone cold. And in that glassy mist, a figure stood behind her reflection. Tall. Slender. Dressed in black. She turned quickly. No one was behind her. She looked back at the mirror. The figure remained. Unmoving. Its face obscured. "Elise," it whispered. Its mouth didn't move. The voice came from inside the glass. The figure reached forward and placed a hand against the mirror. The glass rippled like water. And then Elise saw something else. Another Elise. Behind the figure. Farther back in the mirror. Her own face, pale and frightened, staring out from the far end of a hallway that didn't exist in this world. She was dressed differently, damp hair clinging to her face, a bruise blooming beneath one eye. That version of her reached toward the glass and mouthed a single word. "Run!" Then the mirror went still. The fog cleared. Only her own reflection remained. Elise staggered back, knocking over the chair. It thudded heavily to the floor. A second later, the knock came again. This time, from the door. But not the main one. The bathroom door. The one she hadn't even noticed until now. It opened slowly with a creak. Inside, the light was already on. Flickering. And written on the foggy bathroom mirror, in long, shaky letters. "She's not the housekeeper." Elise stood just outside the bathroom, her arms stiff at her sides. The flickering light above the mirror buzzed softly, too soft, like a failing heartbeat. She stared at the message scrawled across the fogged mirror. "She's not the housekeeper." The letters dripped as though written in condensation, or something else. Behind her, the room remained quiet. Too quiet. The fire had burned down completely now, leaving the hearth cold and empty. The guest book lay closed on the desk, as if it had never moved. She stepped into the bathroom. The tiles were black and white, checkerboard style, but the white ones were stained a dull yellow. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners. A faint water stain had eaten its way into the ceiling above the shower, and the drain cover was rusted into place. It didn't look like the rest of the room. It didn't look like it belonged. Elise stepped up to the sink and reached toward the mirror, wiping the letters away with her sleeve. Her own face emerged, distorted in the uneven glass. She barely recognized it. Her skin was paler than before, her lips colorless, her eyes darker, like something inside them was growing roots. She touched the surface. It was warm, and then she saw it again. A flash, barely a second, but it was there. The other Elise standing just behind her reflection. Hair wet, eyes wild, mouth stitched shut. The image vanished the moment she blinked. She turned sharply, expecting something, anything, to be behind her. But nothing was there. Not even her own reflection. She turned back to the mirror. Empty. Just fog. Then a noise. From behind the shower curtain. Soft. Wet. Breathing. She reached out with a trembling hand and pulled the curtain aside. The tub was empty, except for a single, dirty boot print in the bottom. It was small, child-sized. The lights flickered again. Once. Twice. Then everything went black. She stood still in the dark, not daring to move. And from somewhere in the wall behind her, that low whisper returned. "Elise, you left me." Elise backed out of the bathroom, one hand sliding along the wall until she found the frame of the doorway. Her other hand trembled uselessly at her side. The air was colder now, much colder. Not the simple chill of a drafty house, but the still, breathless cold of something waiting. As she crossed the threshold into the bedroom again, the lights flicked back on with a sharp buzz. The fire in the hearth sputtered to life without fuel or flame. Just sudden, eerie warmth where none should be. She turned quickly to the mirror in the bathroom. It was clear. Her reflection had returned. Still pale. Still hollow. But alone. Elise closed the bathroom door, breathing hard, and stumbled to the bed. She needed to leave, had to. But the door was still fused to the wall, no knob, no hinges. The room was sealed. She clenched her fists, trying to summon logic, reason, anything to ground her. "This isn't real," she whispered. "It can't be." But the house didn't care what she believed. The guest book on the desk rustled. Pages flipped on their own. When it stopped, a folded piece of paper lay tucked in the center. She approached warily and opened it. Inside, handwritten in deep black ink. "You left him in the water." Elise's vision blurred for a moment. A sound, faint, familiar, rippled across her memory. Splashing. Screaming. Then silence. Her knees gave out, and she sat on the bed, hands gripping the paper so tightly it tore. "No," she said aloud. "I don't know what this is." But the house disagreed. The fireplace flared. The mirror cracked, just once, a thin split down its center. And from beneath the floorboards, the whispering returned. Closer now. More voices. Elise pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't help. They weren't speaking to her. They were speaking through her. A chorus of soft voices, overlapping, like water pouring backward. Don't leave me. She's not what she says. You forgot. Her eyes rolled back for a moment. She saw flashes of trees, a river, the glint of metal, and then a small hand slipping beneath the surface. She gasped and collapsed to the floor, breath knocked from her lungs. The last thing she heard before everything went black was a child's voice in her ear. Why didn't you come back for me? Elise woke to silence. She was lying on the cold floorboards beside the bed, one arm bent awkwardly beneath her. The fire had died again, completely this time, and the only light in the room came from the flickering sconces. Her body ached like she'd been running in her sleep. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream. The voices, the mirror, the closet corridor. But when she sat up, she saw the guest book still open on the desk, the torn paper resting beside it. You left him in the water. The words stared at her, unmoving, undeniable. No, she said softly. No, that's not right. That's not mine. But her hands were trembling again. She stood on shaky legs and staggered to the mirror. The crack down its center remained, thin but sharp, like the glass itself had been wounded. Her reflection looked worse than before. Eyes sunken, cheeks pale, skin drawn tight at the jawline. And something else. A faint, wet smear on her collarbone. She touched it. Water. Not sweat. Not tears. Cold, earthy smelling river water. Elise. The voice was behind her again. She turned. Agnes stood in the center of the room. She hadn't come through the door. She was simply there. Her hands were folded as always, her face calm. But her eyes were different now. No longer kindly. Something behind them shimmered, like deep, still water reflecting too much moonlight. You look pale, she said softly. The room must be showing you too much too soon. Elise backed away. What are you? Agnes smiled. I told you, dear. I'm the housekeeper. I help you remember. I don't want to remember. But that's why you came. Why they all come. She tilted her head slightly, bird-like. It's your memory keeping you here, Elise. Not me. Elise's breathing quickened. There was someone under the bed. Someone in the walls. I heard them. A child. He said I left him. Agnes gave a slow, solemn nod. Sometimes the house shows you what you buried. Sometimes it shows you who. Who was it? Elise whispered. Agnes didn't answer. She turned and walked to the mirror. Her reflection wasn't there. Only Elise's. And standing behind that reflection, a shadow in the shape of a child. Agnes traced a fingertip across the crack in the glass and said, without turning, You'll need to go back to the river soon. Then she vanished. The moment Agnes disappeared, the air shifted again. The warmth left the room entirely. The fire snuffed out like a breath extinguished it. The sconces dimmed to dull embers. Elise stood in the half-light, frozen, staring at the mirror. The shadow behind her reflection was gone. But the cold remained. And somewhere, faintly, she heard water dripping. A rhythmic plip-plip-plip, like something leaking behind the walls. She crossed the room to the door. The false wall was still there, solid and cold beneath her palm. No doorknob. No seams. She knocked, just once, on instinct. The wall echoed back. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. She pressed her ear to it. Water. Not dripping anymore. Rushing. Flowing. And under it, something else. A sound she hadn't noticed before. A low groan. Like a voice beneath the current, struggling to speak through churning liquid. Elise! She staggered back, hand to her chest. She had to get out of this room. She turned to the window and crossed quickly. The view outside hadn't changed. Still the same endless gray. The same still trees. But now there was something else. a figure standing at the edge of the woods. Far off. Barely more than a silhouette. Elise squinted. It was a child. Still. Waiting. She pulled back instinctively from the glass. The guest book rustled again. She turned. It had flipped to another page. A new name had been added. Henry Beaumont. Her stomach dropped. Her brother. The one who... No. No, she didn't want to think about that. She walked slowly to the desk, hand hovering above the page. The ink still glistened, as if written only seconds ago. She backed away again and turned toward the bed, her head swimming. She had to lie down. Just for a moment. She sat. The mattress sighed beneath her. Then a whisper from under the bed, closer now, full of wet breath and sorrow. You left me. She clamped her hands over her ears. No. No, I didn't. I tried. You watched me sink. Elise opened her eyes and saw water, actual water, pooling from beneath the bed, spreading across the floor. It was cold. Icy. Smelled of algae and copper and memories. And still, the voice murmured, You were supposed to come back. The water crept over the wooden floor in slow, unnatural movements, too smooth, too quiet. Elise stood, her feet already soaked. The cold bit through her socks like teeth. She looked beneath the bed, but there was no source, no pipe, no crack in the wood. It was just emerging, as if the house itself had begun to bleed memory. The smell grew stronger. Mud, decay, something sweet turning sour. Her stomach twisted. You watched me sink. The voice was clearer now. Close. A child's voice, but wrong. Hollow. Not a whisper anymore, but something dredged up from beneath. Elise staggered back toward the door, heart hammering. She pounded her fists against the false wall where the exit had once been. Let me out, she screamed. This isn't mine. I don't want this. But the wall stayed firm. From behind her came a soft splash. She turned. The bed was gone. In its place, a narrow dock now jutted into a black river. Trees loomed on the banks. The room was no longer a room. It had become the memory. Elise stood barefoot on wet boards. Fog curled at her ankles. Moonlight spilled across the surface of the water in silver ribbons. The current flowed slowly. A child stood at the far edge of the dock. He didn't turn to face her. She knew, without seeing, that it was Henry. Elise, he said. Do you remember now? Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. Henry, I tried. I swear I tried. You let go. I was a kid. I was scared. I didn't know what to. You promised. He turned then. His face W. You brought this back with you. Elise lay still on the floor, cheek pressed against the soaked floorboards, her breath ragged and shallow. Every inch of her body ached. Her skin was clammy with river water, or whatever passed for it in this place. She didn't know what was real anymore. The room had returned to normal. Mostly. The dock was gone. The black water had receded beneath the bed, vanishing as mysteriously as it had come. But her socks were still soaked. Her hair still dripped. And now, on the small table beside the chair, a second teacup, perfectly placed, steam curling gently from the rim. She hadn't heard anyone enter. The door still wasn't real. No sound, no footsteps, no presence. Yet the cup waited, warm and inviting. She approached it slowly, not trusting it, but unable to look away. This one was different. White porcelain, gold trim, and her name painted in delicate cursive along the rim. Elise. The chair had been turned slightly toward the hearth again, just like it had when she first arrived. The faint scent of lavender returned, but something beneath it had soured, like dried flowers and stagnant water. She crouched and picked up the cup. The tea inside was dark. She raised it slowly to her lips and paused. In the reflection on the surface, the room behind her looked wrong. The mirror was cracked, twice now, not once. The bed sheets were rumpled, but not in the shape of sleep. In the shape of something waiting. And someone stood in the corner of the room. Still, just at the edge of the firelight. She spun to look, but nothing was there. She looked back at the cup. The figure remained in the reflection. Closer now. Not Henry. Not Agnes. Someone else. Tall. Dressed in black. Face obscured by shadow. She dropped the cup. It shattered across the wooden floor, dark liquid spilling in an inky bloom. Elise. The voice came not from the figure, not from the room, but from the broken pieces of porcelain. They sang it. She backed away until her legs hit the bed, heart hammering. The mirror cracked a third time, right down the center. And then, faintly, a knock on the wall behind her. 4 slow taps. Tap, 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 tap. Measured. Rhythmic. Elise turned. A panel of the wall just to the left of the mirror was slightly ajar. Not wallpaper. Not drywall. A hidden door. It hadn't been there before. She approached it slowly. And behind her, from somewhere inside the mirror's fractured glass, a whisper followed her like breath. This time, don't look away. Elise reached out and touched the edge of the hidden panel. It moved easily beneath her fingers, gliding open with a whisper like silk sliding over old bones. A cool gust of air spilled from the darkness within, cooler than the rest of the room, and different. It carried the scent of mildew, old stone, and something deeper, something buried. She stepped through. The hidden room was small. Barely more than a cell. No furniture. No light. Just smooth walls, a damp stone floor, and a sense of pressure that hit her chest the moment she entered. As soon as she crossed the threshold, the panel behind her shut on its own with a soft click. Total darkness. She spun and pressed her palms to the wall, searching blindly for the seam. Nothing. The surface had gone smooth again. Okay, she breathed. You're dreaming. You're dreaming, and this is just the deep end. She reached into her coat pocket, where she'd stashed the flashlight earlier, and flicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, dust particles swirling in its path. The room was empty. Almost. On the far wall, her light caught something, a shape. A small wooden chair. And on the chair, a stack of old, folded children's clothes. Neatly placed. A pair of shoes rested beneath them. Scuffed and damp. Elise stepped closer. Her mouth was dry. A tag hung from the collar of the shirt at the top of the pile. Written in smudged marker. H. Beaumont. She staggered back. No, she whispered. This isn't real. But then she saw the carvings. On the wall above the chair, thousands of tiny etchings. Names. Scratched deep into the stone, overlapping, endless. Many she couldn't read. But one stood out, etched deeper than the rest. Elise. The light flickered. Something moved behind her. She spun, flashlight beams slicing through the dark, and caught a glimpse of something just as it ducked out of sight. A pale hand retreating behind the wall. No sound. Just motion. And then stillness again. Elise. A whisper, so close it could have been inside her skull. Elise. Don't forget me again. The flashlight flickered again and died. Total dark. Then a breath against her ear, wet and cold. I waited. Elise held her breath. The dark pressed in like water, dense and crushing. She dropped to her knees, fumbling with the flashlight, smacking it against her palm until the bulb flared weakly back to life. Its flickering beam sliced the shadows just enough to steady her nerves. She scanned the tiny chamber. Empty again. No hand. No figure. Just the stone walls, the worn chair, the stack of clothes. The carvings. Now that she was closer, she saw that the scratches in the wall weren't just names. Some were words. Phrases. Desperate little fragments etched again and again in shaking, childlike handwriting. I didn't mean to. Still here. Don't lock me in. I was cold. I heard you calling, but you never came. Water. 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 Elise backed away, light trembling in her hand. Her own name appeared again, carved 3 times at different heights, like a child had been growing while trapped inside. Elise, the voice whispered again. But not in anger now. It was sad. Lonely. You forgot me. I called you. She turned and pressed her hand against the sealed panel where she'd entered. Let me out, she begged. Please. I want to go home. The house did not answer, but the floor beneath her feet shifted, just slightly. She stepped back, and that's when she saw it. A seam in the stone. A trapdoor, barely visible beneath a thin layer of dust and rot. She hesitated. Every part of her body screamed not to touch it, but something deeper pulled her toward it. Not just fear. Not just curiosity. Guilt. She knelt and brushed it clean. No lock. Just a brass ring embedded in the stone. She took a breath and pulled. The door groaned open on ancient hinges, revealing a wooden ladder descending into pitch black. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the unmistakable scent of river water. Beneath that, the faint sound of something, dripping. Elise. The voice came again, clearer now. Younger. Familiar. I'm still down here. She looked into the dark. And then, with a trembling hand, placed her foot on the first rung. The wood groaned beneath Elise's weight as she lowered herself onto the first rung. The air that rose from below was damp and metallic, curling up her nose and catching in her throat. Every instinct screamed to close the trapdoor and forget it was ever there. But the voice, his voice, had sounded too real, and she'd heard it for years in dreams. She descended slowly, one rung at a time, the flashlight gripped tightly in her hand. Her boots slipped once on the 3rd step, damp with moss. The wood beneath her was spongy, rotted in places, but it held. She couldn't see the bottom. The darkness below was too deep, too thick. It swallowed light like water swallows breath. 10 steps down, the hatch above slammed shut with a snap. Elise gasped and looked up, but there was nothing. Just blackness where the room had been. No crack of light. No sign of the hidden door she had entered through. Okay, she whispered shakily. Just keep moving. The air grew colder with each step. The walls around the shaft narrowed, the stones sweating with moisture. Her flashlight flickered again. Then she reached the bottom. The ladder ended in a shallow pool of murky water. Elise stepped off into ankle-deep muck, her boots sinking slightly. The floor was uneven stone, slick and cold. The passage ahead stretched forward, low-ceilinged, maybe 5 feet tall, and twisted out of sight like a burrow. Faint scratches lined the walls here too. Longer ones. Some deep enough to have been made by fingernails. She moved forward, ducked low. Water dripped from above, rhythmic and hollow. Her flashlight revealed more writing scratched into the stone. It was too deep. I couldn't breathe. She heard me, but she ran. And just beneath one line, carved low and crooked, Henry. Elise fell to her knees. It came back in a wave, the river, the panic, the screaming. Her brother's hand slipping from hers in the current. Her own scream as the water closed over his face. How she had run. How she had told them he vanished. How she had never told anyone that he'd called her name as he sank. Tears burned her eyes. I was a kid, she whispered. I was scared. From the dark ahead, water rippled. Footsteps. Slow. Squishing. And then, A small, waterlogged voice. Elise, you finally came back. Elise froze. The flashlight trembled in her hand, the beam shivering against the damp tunnel walls. That voice, thin and wet like it had clawed its way up from the bottom of the river, reverberated through the tight space. She swallowed hard. "Henry?" she whispered. No answer. Just the soft slap of bare feet against wet stone, getting closer. The beam caught movement, a small figure, just out of reach. A boy. He stepped forward, slowly, his body half-shrouded in fog that clung to the floor like smoke. His clothes were those she remembered, striped t-shirt, cargo shorts, one shoe missing. His hair dripped steadily, clinging to his forehead. His skin was pale, blue around the lips. His fingers pruned, bones jutting beneath waterlogged flesh. But his eyes, they were dry and angry. "You let go," he said. "I didn't mean to," she choked. "I tried to hold on, I did. You promised." "I was only 13, she whispered. "You were 6. The water was fast, I didn't know what to do." Henry tilted his head. Water poured from his ears. "Then why did you lie about it?" Elise couldn't speak. "I screamed for you," he said. Her vision blurred. "I know. I begged. I know. You ran." She staggered back, knees buckling. Henry took another step toward her, and with it, the tunnel changed. It wasn't stone anymore. It was the river. The floor turned to mud. The air became heavy with humidity and the scent of wet leaves. Fog rolled in from every side, hiding the tunnel, hiding the memory, replacing it with the scene she had tried to forget. The current rushed past her legs. Cold, relentless. She turned. And there, on the far bank, stood another version of herself. A child. 13. Shaking. Hair plastered to her face. Watching as Henry sank beneath the surface. The younger Elise turned and ran. The real Elise screamed. "No! Don't!" But the vision didn't hear. Didn't stop. And Henry watched her go. Back in the tunnel, the boy lifted a trembling hand toward her cheek. His skin was freezing, like touching the bottom of a lake. "I waited for you," he whispered. Then his form began to flicker, like a projection on water. Behind him, something else began to rise. Something taller, cloaked in black, and wearing her face. The figure behind Henry unfolded from the darkness like smoke unraveling into shape. It towered above him, draped in a flowing black dress that shimmered with wetness, as though pulled from the riverbed itself. The fabric clung to its form, long-limbed, impossibly thin, and its face. It was Elisa's, but not. The features were sharper, more angular. Eyes sunken and rimmed with shadow. The mouth stretched into a sad, almost mocking smile. Her skin was the color of old porcelain, cracked in places, as though something inside had tried to push its way out. Henry stepped back into the figure's waiting arms. It rested a pale hand on his shoulder, protectively. "This is what you left behind," the other Elise said. Her voice was wrong. It vibrated strangely, like two voices speaking through the same throat. "I didn't mean to," Elise began, but the words felt thinner each time she said them, more hollow. "You buried the memory," the other said, taking a step forward. "You told yourself it was an accident, that no one could have saved him. But you never went back. You never even looked. I was afraid. You were guilty." Henry turned his head slightly, still facing away from her. "You forgot my face, Elise." "No," she said, tears now running hot down her cheeks. "I never did. I never forgot you." "Then why did you leave me alone?" The other Elise stepped closer again. The ground beneath her feet didn't ripple like water, it rotted. Every step made the stones beneath her blacken and split. "Do you know what this house is?" she asked. Elise shook her head slowly. It's made of all the things you locked away. The walls are papered with your guilt. The floors are your broken promises. And me. She leaned in. I'm what you could have become. Behind her, Henry was fading. Slowly. Like mist at sunrise. No, no, no. Elise stumbled forward, reaching for him. But the other Elise blocked her path, her eyes wide and unblinking. You don't get to hold him now. You had your chance. The hallway began to collapse around them, stone crumbling to black water, memory unraveling. You can still wake up. The other Elise whispered. But you'll forget again. You always forget. I won't. Elise gasped. Not this time. I swear. The words were cut off as the ground gave way. She fell. Cold, rushing water surrounded her. The last thing she saw before she hit the surface was Henry's face, floating above her. Disappointed. And disappearing. Elise plunged through the water like falling through 1,000 years of guilt. Cold swallowed her whole. It wasn't just the chill of the river. It was the bite of everything she had refused to feel. Every memory she had buried. Every lie she had told to make the pain manageable. She thrashed, lungs burning. Her flashlight was gone. The current dragged her deeper, not forward, not backward, just down. Into herself. Into the house. Hands brushed against her ankles. Then her wrists. They didn't grab her. They guided her. She let them. And then light. Not natural light. Not sun or moon or fire. A pale green glow, like the wallpaper in the guest room. It surrounded her, folded into the shape of a hallway beneath the water, a corridor lined with doors. Her body stopped sinking. She was standing again, soaked but breathing, water pooling around her feet as though it had drained away without her noticing. The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. The doors were all labeled in the same delicate script as the one on the guest room. The room with no mirror. The room for things unsaid. The room where he waited. And farther down, the room he locked. Elise moved toward it. The door was taller than the others. Older. It had been painted over again and again, green, white, red, then black, but cracks showed beneath each layer. It had been sealed, forgotten, reburied a dozen times in different disguises. But the name had always remained. The room you locked. She raised her hand to the knob. It was warm. It always was. She hesitated, forehead resting against the door, breast shallow. I didn't mean to forget him, she whispered. I just didn't know how to remember without falling apart. From behind the door, a small voice answered. You don't have to fall. She turned the knob. The door opened without resistance. Inside was a child's bedroom. Modest. Familiar. A twin bed. A row of dinosaur toys. A worn backpack with Henry's name written on the flap. His handwriting. She stepped in. There were no shadows in this room. Only stillness. And there, sitting on the edge of the bed, was Henry. Alive. Not wet. Not ghostly. Just him. 7 years old now. Older than he had been when he drowned. He looked up at her with quiet eyes. I knew you'd come back, he said. Elise fell to her knees. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I didn't save you. Henry smiled sadly. Then save yourself. Henry's smile faded, but he didn't look angry anymore. Not accusatory. He looked tired, older than a child should be, like he had carried her sorrow as long as she had. The bedroom around them pulsed faintly with light, like a breath. The air smelled like warm laundry and peanut butter sandwiches, real things. Childhood things. Elise felt it settle over her like a blanket she hadn't realized she missed. You didn't lock the room to forget me, Henry said softly. Elise swallowed, tears pricking again. Then why does it feel like I did? You locked it to protect yourself. Because you couldn't keep living inside that moment. He looked down at his shoes, legs swinging lightly from the bed. But you forgot to come back for me. I didn't know how. You still don't, he said gently, then looked up. But you came anyway. The walls of the room flickered, just for a moment, and the house groaned softly in response, like it had been holding its breath. Something deep beneath the floor shifted. You were just a kid, Henry said. I know you were scared. But it wasn't your fault. Elise's lip trembled. You don't know that. I do. The river took me. You called my name. I know. I heard you. I know, Ellie. She pressed both hands to her mouth. She hadn't heard that name in years. No one had called her that since the day of the accident. Not her parents. Not her therapist. Not even her own mind. Henry stood and walked toward her. She reached for him, but he didn't move into her arms. He took her hand instead, and placed something in it. A skeleton key. Old. Heavy. Warm. What's this? She whispered. The key to the room you locked. Elise looked around, confused. But I'm in it. Henry shook his head once. No, he said. This is my room. He pointed behind her. And there, where the bedroom door had been before, stood another door. Iron. Twice her height. Charred around the edges. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and heavy. Etched into the surface. The room that remembers you. Elise stared at the iron door. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though heat pulsed behind it, not warmth, but memory, pressing against the metal like steam trapped in a pipe. Each breath she took felt harder now. The room had begun to tighten around her, not in threat, but in insistence. The house wanted her to see. Do I have to go in? She asked Henry. He didn't speak. He simply nodded once, solemnly. She looked at the key in her hand. Its teeth were crooked. Too many notches. Too many turns. It felt heavier with each second she hesitated. The door loomed. Its inscription glowed faintly in gold. The room that remembers you. Elise stepped toward. The bed frame was broken, one leg splintered and bleeding rust into the warped floor. The walls were cracked, the wallpaper torn. The mirror hung askew, shattered in 3 places. The desk was overturned, the ledger open and pages strewn across the floor like fallen leaves. The air buzzed with a low, droning hum. And on the far wall, carved deeper than anything else, etched in black. You stayed too long. Elise stepped through the threshold. The moment she did, her head filled with voices. Not whispers. Wails. Every version of herself, the one who ran, the one who wept at the river's edge, the one who buried the memory and said nothing in therapy, the one who smiled at family dinners and pretended nothing was missing, all screamed. She dropped to her knees, clutching her ears, but the screams weren't around her. They were inside. And above all of them, the voice of the house, smooth and steady. You were meant to visit, not live here. She forced herself to her feet, staggering forward into the broken room. Her fingers brushed the ruined desk, the guest book fallen beside it. She knelt and opened it. All the names were gone, every page blank, except the last. Her name, Elise Beaumont. Beneath it, in freshly wet ink, you may leave now, but not unchanged. Behind her, the door creaked shut. The door shut with a low, final thud, like the closing of a crypt. Elise turned slowly. The ruin around her had grown still. No wind. No water. Just silence. Not the watchful hush she'd felt before, but an emptied silence. As though the house had finally exhaled. She stood in the center of the broken guest room, holding the guest book. The fire in the hearth was cold. The mirror, cracked in 3 long streaks, reflected only her this time. Only her. But her reflection, it looked whole. Worn, yes. Pale, shaken. But behind her eyes something glimmered. Not darkness. Not fear. Recognition. She stepped toward the mirror. "I remember," she whispered. Her reflection didn't answer. It didn't need to. The cracks began to fade, softly at first, then rapidly. One by one, the fractures in the glass sealed themselves, as though the memory had been absorbed and healed in the telling. Behind her, something shifted. She turned. The iron door was gone. So was the rot, the ruin, the mildew. The guest room stood whole once more. Firelight crackled gently in the hearth. The scent of lavender returned, but cleaner now, no sourness beneath it. She stepped forward in disbelief. The bed was made, neat and undisturbed. The desk sat upright, guest book resting neatly on its surface. The suitcase was packed again, waiting beside the chair. She picked up the guest book one last time and opened to her page. Her name was there, but something new had been added beneath it. A departure date. Elise Beaumont, checked out. And underneath, in Agnes's delicate, unmistakable handwriting, "You carried him long enough. You may carry yourself now." A sound came from the hallway. She turned and saw the door. The real one. Whole. Painted green. With a brass knob. Light poured in beneath it, soft and golden. Elise took a deep breath, then crossed the room. Her hand found the knob, warm beneath her palm. She turned it, and the door opened. Elise stepped into the hallway. The air was different, still warm, but lighter, as if the gravity that had weighed on her chest since she entered the house had finally lifted. The sconces glowed gently, casting soft halos of gold on the wallpaper, which no longer looked faded, but fresh. No voices whispered from behind the walls. No creaking floorboards chased her footsteps. The house was silent. Truly silent, in a way it hadn't been since the moment she arrived. She turned, half expecting the guest room door to vanish behind her again, replaced by blank wall. But it remained. The words etched into the door had changed. No longer the guest room. Now, thank you. She swallowed, lips parting slightly. The house had remembered her, and it had let her go. She walked down the corridor slowly, passing the paintings that once followed her with their eyes. Now they looked like ordinary portraits, sepia-toned strangers from long ago, no longer watching, just resting. The stairs came into view. She hesitated at the top, placing one hand on the banister. They were the same wooden steps she had climbed what felt like a lifetime ago, when the storm had rolled in and the door had opened before she could knock. She descended one slow step at a time. The first floor hadn't changed much. The parlor was still lit by the fire, the same armchair facing it, the same empty teacup on the side table. But there was something calmer about it now. The hush of a house finally finished saying what it needed to say. Agnes stood by the front door. She looked different. Not younger or older. Just less. Less shadow. Less silence wrapped around her. Her hands were no longer folded, but relaxed at her sides. She smiled at Elise. Did the room remember what it needed to? Elise gave a small nod. It did. Agnes reached for the front door and opened it. Sunlight poured through. Real light. Not the sickly gray of the house's earlier illusion, but true morning. The gravel path outside was damp from last night's storm. Birds called softly from the trees. Elise turned back once, taking one last look at the house's interior. No flickers. No tricks. Only warmth. Then she stepped outside. The moment her foot touched the porch, the door closed behind her. Elise stood on the porch for a long time, unsure what to do with her hands, her breath, her body. The cool air touched her face gently. Real air. No scent of river rot, no lavender perfume. Just pine, and damp earth, and morning. She turned slowly to look back at the house. Its windows were dark now. Still. The porch swing swayed lazily in the breeze, creaking in a rhythm that felt familiar, not ominous, but nostalgic. The kind of sound you might hear on a slow afternoon while reading a book and sipping tea. The house stood unchanged, and yet transformed. Not in appearance, but in intent. It had shown her what she buried. It had waited for her to remember. And now it rested. She stepped down from the porch onto the gravel path. Her boots crunched softly beneath her as she made her way toward the car parked at the base of the drive, just where she'd left it. Except, it looked different. Clean. No mud on the tires. No dew on the windshield. As though no storm had passed. She approached and touched the door handle. It was unlocked. The keys sat in the ignition. A folded note lay on the driver's seat. She picked it up. Elise, when you drive away, you may forget. That's how this place works. But forgetting is not erasing. It simply means you don't carry the weight every day. The house will remember for you. That's what it's for. You don't have to live here anymore. Eh? She smiled softly. Agnes. Her memory keeper. Her guide through the dark. She folded the note, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine purred to life on the first try. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The house had vanished. No porch. No pine trees. Just an empty dirt road winding through forest. She didn't panic. She didn't try to explain it. She simply shifted the car into gear and drove. The road opened up ahead of her like a page being turned. Elise drove in silence. No music. No podcasts. No radio signal. Just the hum of the tires over the road, the occasional crackle of gravel under the wheels, and the soft sound of the wind brushing against the windows. The trees parted slowly as she left the forest, golden sunlight pouring through the canopy like honey. For the first time in what felt like days, she could see the world clearly. No fog. No strange reflections. No shadows pacing her in the corner of her eye. She passed a wooden sign nailed to a fence post, almost too weathered to read. But as she rolled by, she caught 3 words etched in peeling white paint. You were here. It didn't startle her. Some part of her had expected it. The note had warned her, you may forget. But she didn't feel the fear that forgetting once brought. Her chest no longer tightened when Henry's name floated across her mind. It hurt, but cleanly. Sharply. Like setting a bone. She reached into her coat pocket without thinking. The key was gone. So was the guest book page. But she hadn't really expected to keep either. What she had now was something heavier, and lighter at the same time. A memory lived through. She slowed the car as she reached a familiar curve in the road. Up ahead, the town sign. Mirth, 3 miles. She blinked. Hadn't she been headed there before? It felt like a century ago. She touched her phone, expecting it to be dead. It lit up. For missed text from her cousin. A voicemail. A blinking green bar of service. Time hadn't stopped after all. She pulled over at the side of the road and just sat. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, but calm. She wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. But she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. The house had done what it was built to do. She looked in the rearview mirror once more, though she already knew. The road behind her was empty. No house. No forest. Just a long stretch of morning. She let herself cry. Not out of fear. Not from guilt. But because, for the first time, she could feel everything without drowning. That night, Elise stayed at a small motel just outside Mirth. A single-story place with plastic keycards, vending machines humming outside each room, and a door that didn't quite latch unless you lifted and pulled. The kind of place people passed through and forgot, like background noise. She liked that. The ordinary quiet. The buzz of the AC. The soft creak of plumbing when someone flushed 2 rooms over. She sat on the bed for a long while, watching the television without really seeing it. Static voices from a late-night nature documentary blending with her thoughts. Her phone buzzed. A text from her cousin. "You okay? You kind of vanished." Elise hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the screen. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just needed to stop somewhere and reset." She hit send. Then she opened the nightstand drawer out of habit. A Bible. And something beneath it. She froze. It was a photograph. Old. Curled at the corners. Sepia-toned. A tall house. Victorian. Familiar. Her stomach dropped. It was the house. The very same, though older now, overgrown with ivy, the porch warped. But unmistakable. The same sharp roofline. The same narrow upper windows that had watched her like eyes. And written in faded ink on the bottom corner. Mirth Boarding House, EST 1886. Reclaimed in 1904 after disappearance of guests. Elise turned the photo over. On the back, in faded pencil. She still sleeps in the attic. She remembers everything. Elise set it down gently, then rose and crossed to the motel room mirror. For the first time in a long time, her reflection didn't frighten her. No cracks. No double images. Just her. But a thought settled over her shoulders like dust. What if someone else found the house? Would it be waiting again? Would Agnes greet them? Would a room be prepared? Elise returned to the bed, curling up under the stiff blanket. And far, far away, where no roads led, a tall house stood silent among the pines. A porch swing creaked softly in the wind. And in the attic, where dust covered a crib and the wallpaper peeled in curls, someone shifted in her sleep. Eyes opening slowly. Not with hunger, but memory. Elise dreamed. She was back in the guest room, but it wasn't hers. It wasn't Henry's either. It was darker. The wallpaper a different pattern. Black and gold floral, almost baroque. The 4-poster bed sagged under a moth-eaten quilt. The mirror was missing. A rocking chair sat in the corner, unmoving. On the desk, a cup of tea, still steaming. She walked slowly to the chair. It looked antique, curved from dark wood, spindled arms worn smooth by years of use. It wasn't moving, but it felt like it had just stopped. Something crunched beneath her foot. She looked down. Dust. No, not just dust, ashes. She knelt and picked up a small, brittle scrap of paper. Nearly illegible. The ink had run long ago, but one word still showed. Agnes. She turned toward the desk again, and there it was. The guest book. Its pages yellowed and thin. She opened it. Each name was scorched. The ink bubbled and blistered like it had tried to burn itself away. Some pages were entirely blackened. But deep near the center there it was. Agnes Bellwether. Check-in 1911. Check-out. No date. No departure. Elise felt a chill crawl up her spine. She flipped to the very back. A blank page. Then, new ink began to bloom. Guest, Elise Beaumont. Checked out, yes. Checked back in, dreaming. She slammed the book shut. The room breathed around her. The chair creaked. Her heart stuttered. Then, soft footsteps upstairs. Above the ceiling. Slow. Measured. Pacing back and forth. She turned to the door, but there wasn't one. Only the wall. And that sound. Footsteps overhead. Back and forth. Back. And forth. The attic. She's still up there, Elise whispered. She never left. The footsteps stopped. And from above, 3 slow knocks. Not on the floor. On the inside of her skull. She woke gasping in the motel bed, drenched in cold sweat. The clock read 3:03 a.m. And in the corner, the old rocking chair was gently swaying. Elise sat upright in bed, heart racing. The rocking chair in the corner moved slowly, gently. No breeze, no visible cause. Just the quiet, steady creak of wood shifting with a rhythm not her own. She reached for her phone. 3:04 a.m. now. The motel room glowed with faint blue light from the neon sign outside, buzzing softly through the curtains. The chair stopped moving. Instantly. Too cleanly. Like something had noticed her noticing. Elise swung her legs over the side of the bed, her socks brushing against the thin motel carpet. She stared at the chair. Nothing else moved. The shadows were still. The television still murmured a commercial for cold medicine. A truck passed outside on the highway. Normal. Almost. Then she saw it. On the seat of the chair. Something that hadn't been there before. A key. Old brass. Worn smooth at the handle. Familiar in a way that made her bones ache. She stood, approached the chair, and picked it up. It was worn, and engraved at the base, in tiny cursive letters. The attic. She almost dropped it. No, she whispered aloud. I left. The house let me go. But the key was real. Solid. It pulsed faintly in her palm, as if remembering her too. She backed away from the chair and turned toward the mirror above the dresser. No cracks. No reflection beside her. Just herself. But written across the glass in faint condensation. Some doors open both ways. She spun, key clutched in her fist. The rocking chair was still. But now there was dust, settling slowly, as if something had just stood up and walked away. Elise turned back toward the motel door. It was closed. Locked. But something inside her knew, if she opened it now, it wouldn't lead to the parking lot. Not anymore. It would lead back. Not to the guest room. Not to the river. But to the one place she hadn't dared to visit. The attic. And the key in her hand? It was expecting her. Elise stared at the motel door. Her reflection in the mirror had faded, but the message remained, etched in soft breath. Some doors open both ways. She looked at the key in her hand. The attic. Not an attic. The attic. She should have thrown it across the room. Let it vanish like the house itself. But her fingers refused to let go. And deep inside, beneath reason, beneath fear, something whispered, you have one more floor to climb. She crossed to the door and unlocked it slowly. Half expecting the parking lot. Half expecting the woods. What she found was worse. A staircase. Narrow. Wooden. Dust-covered. Rising steeply into shadow. She should have seen the outside through that door. Neon lights. Soda machines. Highway silence. Instead, the house again. Or maybe just a piece of it. Preserved in her like marrow. She stepped through. The air shifted the moment her foot hit the first step. Dry. Thin. The temperature dropped. The scent of lavender was gone now, replaced by the dry musk of old insulation and something else. Cedar, cloth, ash. Each step groaned beneath her weight, but the sound didn't echo. There were no echoes in this place. Only listening. Halfway up, she found a doll on one of the steps. Hand-stitched. Its button eyes loose. One arm missing. A faint red stain on the hem of its faded dress. It looked like something a child might leave behind during a fire. Elise stepped over it. The door at the top came into view. Shorter than a normal door. Stained black. The knob was old brass, worn with use. And around its edges, faint burn marks licked up the frame. She reached the landing and stood before it, hand trembling slightly. The key vibrated in her palm, gently. Eagerly, she inserted it into the lock. It turned without resistance. Click. And then, a pause, like the house was holding its breath. Then the door creaked open, and the attic revealed itself. The attic smelled of old wood, dry rot, and smoke. Not the sharp sting of recent fire, but the soft, ashen breath of something long extinguished. The kind of fire that consumes slowly and quietly until only memory remained. Elise stepped inside. The floor creaked with every motion. Dust stirred around her boots, swirling in slow spirals like something waking. The room was long, with a slanted ceiling that pressed down like a low sky. Boxes lined the edges, covered in yellowing sheets. Stacks of books leaned precariously. A crib sat in the far corner, the bars scorched, a mobile hanging above it, motionless. Its figures had melted long ago, leaving curled shadows in the shape of stars. But what drew her attention most was the mirror. It was massive, nearly floor to ceiling, propped against the far wall, tilted slightly forward as if bowing to no one in particular. It was shattered, the glass fractured into spiderwebs of broken memory. Pieces missing, some shards resting on the floor like discarded truths. Elise approached slowly. Her reflection multiplied in each shard, dozens of versions of herself. Crying, screaming, blank-faced, laughing. 13, 28, older. One looked directly at her. One stepped closer. She blinked. All the reflections froze. All except one. At tea. No, the woman replied. I'm what you left behind before the river. Before the guest room. I'm the part you shut in this attic. The one who knew the fire was coming. Elise's heart thudded. The rocking chair in the corner moved slightly, then stopped. I'm the truth you won't open. Elise stepped forward until her palm hovered just above the mirror's broken face. I'm ready. The attic light dimmed, and the other Elise smiled. Then come see what you've really forgotten. Elise placed her hand against the center pane of the fractured mirror. It was cold, not just to the touch, but inside her, like the temperature of grief buried under years of silence. Like the moment a person stops crying not because they've stopped hurting, but because they've gone too far beyond tears. The glass didn't resist. It accepted her. With a soft, watery ripple, her hand passed through. Then her arm. Then her face. She stepped forward, and the attic disappeared. Gone were the dust and soot and quiet air. Now wind. She stood on a cracked stone path, surrounded by fields of tall grass swaying under a stormless sky. The light was twilight, though no sun or moon marked it. Just a dull gray blue, suspended as if time had stopped halfway between one breath and the next. Before her stood a house. But not the house. This one was skeletal. Half-built. Half-ruined. It shifted as she stared at it, walls vanishing and reappearing. Rooms exposed like open wounds. Doors that led nowhere. Windows with no glass. Beams bent, stairs broken halfway through ascent. The framework of a memory she had never let herself finish. This is you, said a voice beside her. She turned. The other Elise stood barefoot on the stones. No longer a shade, but solid. Her skin no longer deathly pale, but colorless in a different way, like pages left out too long in the sun. This is what you've been building since the river, she said. A memory house. But you never finished it. Elise stepped toward the broken porch. Why not? Because you weren't ready to remember what started the fire. Elise froze. What fire? The other Elise didn't answer. She only pointed. Elise followed her gaze. In one of the exposed rooms, half suspended in open space, stood a crib. The same crib from the attic. Its bars charred. Ashes scattered like snow. And next to it on the wall, a single photograph, untouched by time or fire. Elise walked to it. It showed a woman, her mother, smiling, younger than Elise had ever seen her, holding a baby, and standing just behind her, a little girl. Elise. She touched the frame, and then the world shifted. The wind stilled, and memory rushed in like flame through a dry forest. The moment Elise touched the photo frame, the air ignited, not in flame, but in remembrance. The skeletal house around her rippled, beams straightening, walls forming, wallpaper appearing in bursts of color, furniture assembling from dust. The broken structure became whole, but wrong, too fast, too alive, like memory stitched together by something desperate to be seen. She staggered back, and the house spoke, not in words, in heat, in crackling, in screams. Suddenly, she was inside a room, not in the dream house, in her childhood home. The walls were familiar, pale yellow, faded stars on the ceiling, toys scattered across the floor, Henry's blanket on the edge of the crib, and in the corner, herself, 8 years old, kneeling beside a candle, a birthday candle. She wasn't supposed to be playing with matches, but the grown-ups weren't watching. They never watched enough. Elise watched herself light it, watched the paper doll in her younger hand catch flame, watched it fall. The blanket caught next, then the crib skirt. It all moved too fast. Little Elise screamed, ran, but never told. Not what really happened. The fire had been blamed on faulty wiring. Her parents never knew, because 8-year-old Elise said nothing. She buried it, deep, below even Henry's drowning. The room spun. The other Elise stood beside her now, watching the flames crawl up the walls. "This was the first door you locked," she whispered. Elise fell to her knees. "I didn't know," she said. "You did. You just didn't let yourself keep knowing." The fire roared louder. Smoke poured into the room, swallowing the walls. Elise coughed, tears blurring her vision. The heat pressed against her skin, a punishment, a truth. "I killed him." "No," the other Elise said, voice suddenly softer. "You were a child. You made a mistake. I started the fire." "Yes. But I didn't. You didn't mean to. But you locked it away. And it festered." The room cracked. Black ash rained from the ceiling. Then the house screamed. Not like before. Like something being freed. And all around her, the walls began to fall apart again. But this time, she stayed. She watched. She didn't run. Not anymore. The house collapsed. Not with fire. Not with rage. But with release. Beams folded inward like a tired body. Windows unlatched themselves. The floor cracked softly beneath Elise's knees as smoke pulled upward like breath returning to the sky. She knelt amid the ruin, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. The baby in her mother's arms. Herself at the edge. Too small to understand. Too curious to fear what fire could do. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. The other Elise stood beside her, still and quiet. Her face no longer sharp, no longer pale, only tired. A reflection that had waited too long to be acknowledged. "I know," she said. "I didn't tell anyone. Not even Henry. And so the fire kept burning in here," the reflection said, gently touching her chest. "In me," Elise murmured. The other Elise nodded. The ruins around them began to fade, not just collapse, but dissolve, as if they had served their purpose and no longer needed to exist. What was left behind wasn't the skeletal frame of the past. It was Elise, standing in a field of soft green. No house. No mirror. No attic. Only light. And the sound of birds, distant and tentative, like a world beginning again. "You never let yourself grieve the girl who lit the match," her reflection said. Elise turned to her. And now? Now you do. The reflection smiled, and it was her smile, fully whole. She stepped closer and took Elise's hand. I'm done now, the reflection whispered. You don't need me to carry this anymore. What happens to you? I fade. Elise looked into her own eyes, older, steadier, full of the ache of years and the quiet joy of memory properly held, and nodded. Okay. And with that, the other Elise stepped backward, into light, and was gone. Elise stood alone, but no longer hollow. The wind shifted, and for the first time since before the river, before the fire, before the silence, she felt peace. And somewhere, not far away, a door closed gently. The sky above the field stretched pale and endless. Elise stood barefoot in the soft grass, the photograph still in her hand, but now it was no longer sharp with guilt. It felt like a page from a finished chapter, real, painful, but closed. There were no houses in sight, no mirrors, no keys, only a footpath worn through the tall grass, leading into a golden mist. It didn't pull her. It didn't call. It simply was. She took a step. The grass brushed her calves like a farewell. She didn't know what was on the other side, but it didn't matter. She was no longer running from anything. She was walking toward herself. As she followed the path, the silence changed. Not the haunted hush of the guest room, or the attic's watchful breathing, but a living quiet. The kind that held birdsong, and wind, and the faint rustle of leaves like laughter in another room. Her heart felt slow, her chest light. She could feel Henry now, not as a weight or a wound, but as part of her. A thread woven into the shape of her soul. Still missed, still mourned, but not misplaced. She thought of the guest room, of the fire, of the locked attic. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of remembering. Not anymore. The path ended at a gate. Wrought iron, half open. Beyond it, a tree-lined road, paved and clean, with morning light spilling over it like honey. She stepped through the gate. Behind her, she heard one last creak. She turned. Far off, in the field, a house stood again. Still, whole, watching. But this time, the windows didn't look like eyes. They looked like rest. The porch light blinked once, like a nod, a farewell, or maybe a thank you. Then the mist rolled in, and it was gone. Not vanished. Waiting, as all memory does. Elise turned back toward the road and walked on. 3 days passed before Elise reached out to her cousin again. She didn't explain much, just that she had taken a detour, stayed in an old place, and needed time. Her cousin didn't push for more, just offered her a room and a tired smile. She stayed in Mirth a week, walked a lot, read books she didn't finish, cooked too much soup, slept more than she had in months. Dreams came, but not the kind that tore her awake. These were softer, memories without weight, faces without blame. One morning, she found herself walking the back roads outside of town, where the trees bent low over gravel and wildflowers climbed fence posts. She wasn't searching, but the land remembered the way. She found it by accident, or maybe not. A post office. Tiny. No signage out front, just a faded red door and a rusting mailbox shaped like a birdhouse. Inside, it smelled like paper, ink, and rainwater. She was going to ask for stamps. Instead, she saw the ledger, sitting on the counter. Open. Not a postal ledger. A guest book. Old. Worn. Her hand hovered above it. The woman behind the counter, gray hair, horn-rimmed glasses, smile like a secret, looked up and said, "Looking for someone?" Elise blinked. "No. I don't think so." "You sure?" the woman said, tapping the book. Sometimes people find their names in here and don't remember writing them. Elise slowly opened the pages. Name after name after name, each written in careful ink. No addresses, no dates, just names. And page 247 was blank. But page 248, her page, was still there. Elise Beaumont, checked out. She smiled faintly and turned the page. Blank. She took the pen from beside the book and wrote, "For those who come next, it's not about forgetting. It's about remembering the right way." She set the pen down, and as she left, the woman behind the counter called out softly, "Be well, dear. The house keeps the lights on." Elise paused at the door. "Does it ever close?" The woman smiled. "Only when it's full." And behind her, on the shelf, sat a skeleton key, labeled spare. Elise left the post office with the weight of memory behind her, and the quiet of understanding settled deep in her ribs. That afternoon, for no reason she could explain, she bought a bell from a little antique shop off Main Street. It was simple, wrought iron, heavy in the hand. When she rang it, it gave a soft, mellow tone, not shrill. A sound like calling someone home for dinner, or waking someone who slept too long beneath the weight of their own dreams. She didn't know why she bought it. She just knew it belonged with her. That night, she placed it on the windowsill of her cousin's spare bedroom, beside a cracked mug of chamomile tea and a single page torn from her journal. If you hear it ring, follow the sound, even if you don't remember why. The next morning, she woke before the sun, and the bell rang. Only once. Soft, but real. She sat up in bed, unsure if it had been part of her dream, but the mug still steamed, and the bell still swayed gently on the sill, as if a breeze had passed through and touched only it. She didn't investigate. Not that time. Some doors only open when you need them to. But that morning, she pulled out her phone and searched for any mention of the house. There was nothing. No address. No map pin. No photographs. Just stories. A few, scattered across forums, old blogs, even one tucked inside a comment thread about roadside motels. They were always the same shape. "I found this house by accident. I don't remember leaving it, but I woke up changed. There was a ledger. My name was already written in it. There was a room just for me. I saw someone I'd lost." And one message, buried on a forgotten website with blinking GIFs and white text on black background, signed only EB. "If the porch light blinks, it's for you." Elise smiled, then closed the tab. She didn't need the internet to tell her the house was real. It had given her back her name, and that was enough. Days passed. Elise stayed in Mirth longer than she'd planned. She found a rhythm. Morning walks. Afternoon coffee. Letters she never sent, written on thick stationery and folded into her journal. She visited the library, the antique shop, and once, a chapel with no name on the door. Everywhere she went, she saw little things. A key in a window display, green ribbon tied to the handle. A child's drawing taped to a storefront. A house with eyes, but smiling. A woman humming a lullaby Elise had heard through the guest room walls. It never scared her. Not anymore. They were signs, but not omens. Keepsakes from the house. Proof she had been there, and left. One afternoon, Elise returned to the motel to pack. It was time to go home. When she unzipped her suitcase, she found something she hadn't packed. A photograph. The same one she had touched in the memory house. Her mother, her baby brother, and herself. But this copy was whole. Crisp. No burn marks. No blur. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting. There was love too. She held it to her chest and cried. Not the breathless, shaking sobs of guilt. but the slow, clean weeping of someone who finally understood how to carry something without letting it crush them. Later that evening, as the sky turned violet over the pine line, she walked one last time along the gravel roads behind the motel. Just to see. Just in case. And there it was. For one breathless moment. Between two trees, where the mist gathered low and pale. The porch light blinked once. Elise smiled. "I know," she whispered. "I'm okay." The light blinked again, then faded. When she returned to the motel, the bell on her windowsill chimed softly. Not calling, just saying goodnight. Back home, weeks later, Elise unpacked slowly. She didn't rush. She didn't run. She folded each item with care, as if her suitcase were sacred. Not just cloth and leather, but the vessel that had carried her out of a place no road had led her into. At the very bottom, she found the guestbook page. The one she'd seen in her dreams. It shouldn't have been there. But it was. Elise Beaumont, checked out. No ink smears. No fading. Just her name, steady and clear. She pinned it to the wall above her desk, next to the photograph. And then, one day, she started writing again. Not letters. Not journal entries. But stories. Not always about the house. But often about rooms. Doors. Mirrors. Loss. And the gentle hands of memory pressing against wood from the other side. Sometimes, late at night, she heard footsteps upstairs. There was no second floor. No attic. But she didn't fear the sound. She simply nodded to the quiet ceiling and said, "Thank you for remembering." One evening, she wrote a short story about a girl who finds a key in her mother's old jewelry box. The key leads to a house. The house leads to the truth. She titled it The Guest Room. She never submitted it. She didn't need to. The writing was the checkout. The next morning, she woke to find her front door open an inch. And on the welcome mat? A single white envelope. Inside, written on thick paper in Agnes's hand. "The house is open again. There's another guest. They're asking for you." Elise stared at the envelope for a long time. She didn't rush to open it. She didn't toss it aside either. She carried it to the kitchen, made tea, and sat at the table like it was an ordinary morning, like she hadn't just received a summons from a place that shouldn't exist. The letter inside was short. "There is a guest. They don't know they've arrived. But the room is ready. No return address. No explanation. Just the echo of something she once was, a traveler crossing the border between memory and denial." Elise placed the letter on the table, then stood. She went to her closet and pulled out her old suitcase. She didn't pack much. Just the essentials. A coat. A flashlight. A single silver bell she'd kept from the motel windowsill. And tucked in the side pocket, she slid a page she had torn from her own guestbook replica. A note written in looping cursive. "You are not alone. Someone came before you. Someone will come after." By nightfall, she was on the road again. She didn't need GPS. Didn't look at road signs. She just drove. The air thickened. The sky deepened. Fog began to gather low to the ground. And just as she rounded a familiar bend in the road, she saw it. The porch light blinking once. Twice. The house. Exactly as it had been. Timeless. Still. Waiting. The trees bowed in the wind. The swing creaked once. And from the upper window, a soft light flickered on, gentle and golden. Someone was inside. A new guest. She pulled the car to a stop. Turned off the engine. The quiet was complete. She stepped out into the night and walked toward the porch. This time, the door didn't open on its own. This time, she knocked. And the voice on the other side, quiet, uncertain, called back. "Hello?" Is someone there? Elise smiled. Yes, she said. I was once a guest too. The door creaked open slowly. On the threshold stood a young man, early 20s, eyes shadowed with fatigue, hair tousled by sleep or uncertainty. He wore a hoodie too big for him, sleeves pulled over his hands. His gaze flicked across Elise with equal parts suspicion and quiet pleading. I didn't think anyone would be here, he said. You found the house, Elise replied gently. Or maybe it found you. He stepped aside, silently inviting her in. The entryway was the same. Gold filigree wallpaper. Soft light from the sconces. The faint scent of lavender, but not the artificial kind. Real. Earthy. Like it had grown in the walls. Elise walked in, her suitcase still in hand. It looks like it's always looked, she murmured. The young man frowned. Have you been here before? She nodded. A long time ago. How did you get out? You don't get. She placed it gently on the side table, beside a second teacup already waiting. I don't understand, the guest said. You will. She turned toward the staircase. He followed her with his eyes, but didn't ask her to stay. She reached the landing and paused, placing her hand on the banister. For a moment she looked toward her old room. The green door was closed again, but it had no name now. Just a simple sign. Vacant. She smiled, and kept walking. Elise didn't return to her old room. Instead, she continued down the corridor until she reached a door she'd never noticed before. It wasn't ornate or painted, not labeled like the others. No brass knob, no flickering candle sconce beside it. Just a plain wooden door. Open. Inside was a small room, no larger than a closet, but with a narrow desk, a straight-backed chair, and a shelf above it lined with ledgers. Not guest books. Logs. Each one had a name written on its spine. She saw her own. E. Beaumont. She reached for it and opened to the first page. Inside, a map of the house. Not literal, more symbolic. Arrows and spirals. Dates. One phrase repeated again and again in careful script. Return to the threshold. Elise understood then. The house didn't forget its guests. But it remembered its keepers, too. She was one now. She ran her fingers across the shelves. Dozens of names. Some etched in red, others faded with time. Agnes's log was the oldest. Heavy. Bound in worn leather. Elise sat at the desk and took a fresh page from the drawer. She began to write. Not a story this time. Not a confession. A record. Arrival. Young man, early 20s. Exhausted. Hand shaking. Knows his name but not what brought him. House responded immediately. Room already labeled. Emotional weight, considerable. Response. Gentle. Cautious. Asked about pain. Not afraid of memory, afraid of what he'll find in it. Prognosis. He will be okay. He already knows. He just doesn't know that he knows. She signed the bottom. Caretaker E. Beaumont. As she set the pen down, she heard footsteps overhead, slow, pacing, quiet. Not her own. Not Henry's. A new guest, walking the halls of memory. She closed the log. From the far end of the corridor, the bell chimed once. Elise smiled. Another door had opened. Later that evening, when the guest had settled into his room and silence wrapped the house once more in its gentle hush, Elise found herself returning to the small caretaker's study. She couldn't sleep. Didn't need to. She pulled Agnes's ledger from the shelf. The book was heavier than it looked, thick with delicate pages that smelled of dried flowers and something fainter, something like river water, like smoke, like time. Inside, the entries were careful. Precise. Beautifully written in a steady hand. Each guest was recorded. Their arrival. Their burden. their room. Some returned more than once. Some never did. Some were simply never listed as checked out. She turned to the earliest entries. But whether Agnes entered voluntarily. Status retained. Role assumed housekeeper. Reason, too many doors left open. Elise let out a breath. She turned a few more pages and found notes written in a shakier hand. Reflections. Hopes. Questions. Beneath one passage scribbled in the margins. I stayed because someone must greet them. Someone must hand them the key. Elise felt something like grief, not mourning, exactly, but inheriting. She placed the book down gently. On the inside cover, pressed flat like a relic, was a dried flower. Lavender. She left it there, and wrote her own name on the spine of a new logbook. Beaumont, Elise, entered twice. Stayed by choice. She placed the book beside Agnes's, then sat back in the chair, folded her hands on the desk, and waited. The walls of the house creaked softly around her. Not groaning, not stretching, just breathing. Then, the soft ring of the bell. One chime. A new arrival. Elise stood and walked toward the stairs. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway like memory returning home. The second floor hallway was dim when Elise arrived. Not dark, never dark, but soft and quieted, like dusk had pooled there. The sconces glowed low, and the wallpaper shimmered faintly with the soft sheen of old memory. She paused outside the first door on the left. It had no name yet, just a space for one. A blank brass plaque. But even without a label, she felt it. The weight behind the door. A soul not quite broken, but bent. Folded under guilt, or sorrow, or something unnamed. She remembered that feeling, the hum in the bones when the room knew you better than you knew yourself. Elise knocked gently. No response. So she opened it. Inside, the room was dim. The fire already lit, casting warm shapes on the walls. The suitcase sat beside the bed. The teacup steamed on the table. The guest stood by the window, back to her, arms folded tightly. You came back, Elise said softly. The guest turned. It was a woman, maybe 40. Lines under her eyes like tiny road maps. Red scarf around her neck. Her expression was blank with exhaustion. The kind of tired that sits beneath the skin. I didn't mean to find this place, she said. I was just driving. No one finds it on purpose, Elise replied. But no one arrives by mistake. The woman's throat bobbed. It knew my name. Elise nodded. It always does. The woman turned back to the window. I haven't said her name aloud in 12 years. You won't need to, Elise said. But the room might. Silence. Then, she was 5. Elise crossed the room and placed a hand on the guest's shoulder. Would you like company? For a while? The woman didn't answer with words. Just leaned gently into Elise's touch and wept. Not wildly. Not broken. But with the quiet sobs of someone who had carried too much for too long. Elise stayed. She poured the tea. They sat in silence beside the fire, as the house listened and remembered. And upstairs, the attic stirred, just once, and fell still again. The woman, her name was Margaret, though Elise didn't ask, stayed in the room for 3 days. She barely left. She didn't need to. Some guests wandered. Some fought. Some begged to leave before they were ready. But Margaret was quiet. She listened. She felt. And the room showed her what it had saved for her. The second night, Elise heard footsteps overhead. Not Margaret's. Not her own. Just the old familiar pacing of the attic. Slow. Steady. Patient. The third morning, the room was empty. The fire burned low, but unattended. The suitcase was gone. So was Margaret. The teacup had been cleaned and placed neatly on the saucer, and the guest ledger on the desk, signed in looping blue ink, Margaret L. checked out. Beneath it, in a smaller hand, "She forgave me." Elise closed the ledger, held it for a moment to her chest, then returned it to the caretaker's shelf. As she placed it beside her own, something caught her eye. A book she hadn't seen before. Dark leather, gold trim, blank spine. She opened it. Inside, on the first page, house notes, cycles and shifts. She flipped through dozens of pages. Empty. But then, on the very last sheet, "When the house forgets, the caretaker remembers. When the caretaker is ready, the house will sleep." Elise closed the book slowly. She returned to the parlor. The fire was lit there too, soft, low, like a final candle in a nearly empty church. Outside the window, the trees swayed, slow and full of memory. She stepped onto the porch. Evening had settled again, neither morning nor night. The house's favorite hour. From the woods she heard laughter. A child's. For a moment she tensed. But it wasn't haunted. Just distant. Remembered. Fading like a lullaby you once knew by heart. Elise placed the key on the railing. The attic key. Its work was done. And somewhere deep inside the house, a mirror smoothed itself. The cracks sealed. Not because they never happened, but because healing is its own kind of memory. That night, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not empty. Not abandoned. But at peace. The rooms were still. The walls breathed softly. The bell did not chime. The mirrors held only their own reflections. No shadows moved behind the doors. No footsteps circled above the ceiling. Elise walked the hall slowly, her fingertips brushing wallpaper that felt like silk spun from memory. She paused in front of the guest room, her room. It had no nameplate now. Just a single word carved into the wood. Rested. She smiled and moved on. The fire in the parlor had gone out, but the room felt warm. The teacup sat empty, not forgotten, but cleaned. Waiting, perhaps, for another evening. She sat in the caretaker's chair one last time. The logs were shelved. The desk was clear. And there, in the center of it, was the guest book. She opened to the final page. No name. Just a message scrawled in familiar handwriting. "You can go now. We'll remember for you." She closed the book gently, kissed the cover once, and left it there. As she walked through the front door, the floor didn't creak behind her. No lights blinked. No voice called out. The house simply let her go. Outside, the road stretched forward in early light. The sun rising through mist. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She carried the house with her now, in the quiet way she listened, in the kindness in her hands, in the way she said people's names like they mattered. And somewhere behind her, in a place not on any map, the house stood still. The swings swayed gently. The windows watched softly. The rooms rested. Until someone new knocked. Until memory called again. And the bell tolled once more.